Hi, my name is Nolan Chambers, and for our discussion this week, we're kind of talking about the current status of the salary cap in the MLB and how the MLB is kind of looked at fixing that and whether or not the fans seem to resonate with that, and just what is going on there and if it's really something that we can fix without a salary cap or if there are any solutions at all. I think essentially the biggest thing to look at first is just that I think there are ways that this can be slowed down, and ultimately the first thing that people will come to and say the best way to slow down this increase in spending and all the higher salaries and everything that we've gotten to is just by adding a salary cap. But unfortunately, that's not really possible. And from reading through various articles and everything in my research for this, it's pretty clear that this is something that the owners have wanted for years. And while the owners are very insistent on the fact that they need a salary cap, and I think a lot of especially the owners at the bottom of the spending pool in the league and the teams that aren't consistently getting into really super high salaries, they're the ones that are pushing for this more so than even the owners at the top of the league. But I think it's pretty unanimous across the board that they would want it. The problem is that the players and the Players Association have basically said no for years. That's a non-starter. So when looking at potential solutions, you really can't even bring in the salary cap. So the first thing to note is the collective bargaining agreement that came to the fact that we're going to have the CBT as the competitive balance tax, otherwise known as the luxury tax. This has been in effect since the 90s, and it's grown and changed throughout the years, and as recently as 2016 there was a update to it that made it even more strenuous on these owners, and it's slowly gotten to the point where the ownership of the teams are taxed a little bit more and a little bit more, and it goes a little bit farther each time to make sure that we're taxing them every time they go over the luxury tax number. And if they go over this number, then every dollar on that is taxed at a certain percentage, and that goes back to basically making it in a perfect world, if you don't want to pay any of the tax, you hit this number exactly. So it's essentially in itself a form of a salary cap, but it's not labeled as one, and there's obviously ways around it, and the best teams in the league every year are going over that number. So that's why we talk about the Mets and the Dodgers. That's one way to look at it. So is there a way to continue making this luxury tax even more kind of hurtful to the owners and making it so they want to go over that number even less? Sure, that could be possible. Another article from Forbes that I found brought up the fact that if we look at just the players' salaries themselves, there are other ways that we could tax the teams or kind of stop them from spending this money. And one way is to look at internal factors such as how much they're paying their front office, how much they're investing into scouting, especially international scouting, which costs a lot more to go scout those areas than it does to go down the street to your local Division I baseball game that may be close by. But if you think about it, the more you're paying your front office people, the better chance you're getting better people in there that are going to give you a competitive advantage from the teams that are paying less. So it's not on as big of a scale as the salary disparity, obviously, but this was just something they brought up because they mentioned the same thing, that ultimately a salary cap is a non-starter. So that's something to look at for sure, and maybe that does increase the likelihood that you can get some more competitive balance because some front offices aren't exponentially more experienced, better paid, better in general than others are. I think another way to look at it is the fact that we have this new thing that essentially it seems like many of the major signings are doing, where all this money is not being paid up front, but instead it's getting backrolled all the way down to the line at the end of the contract. So we're basically deferring all of this money. Maybe there's a way to put an end to that, because ultimately I think that is something that a lot of teams are having a problem with. And maybe there should be no deferred money. I think that would be a lot easier to get behind than just a full salary cap, because ultimately if we weren't allowed to defer a lot of this money, that would put an end to some of this spending by teams like the Dodgers and Mets, because ultimately these deals that they're signing are huge, but they're not coming off the books now, and that's why they're able to keep signing more and more and just keep deferring money down the line. So I think that's certainly one way to look at it. And I think there's another thing that was brought up in the prompt this week was Do you genuinely think this increased spending is hurting fan interests? I think it is, and I think just by looking at reading through comments on whether it's Twitter or on articles or things like that, I think it's clear that the fans are fed up. And when you look at teams like the A's, where you're having such this big fan response for the team moving and not wanting to spend money and all of this stuff, it's clear that it's wearing on the fans, and in the grand scheme of things, maybe it's not making as big of a difference as we thought, and teams are still going to have support and the league is still going to make tons of money. But I do think there is a fatigue to the fact that, over half of the teams in the league are not even coming close to the spending of the Dodgers or the Mets or any of these teams at the top of the spending pool. And they know that essentially everything has to go perfect and things have to go wrong for them, for their team to get into the mix. So for a team like the A's or the Rockies, they're just never going to be there until some changes are made in how their teams spend. And I think the biggest reason why this isn't as big of a problem as it seems is just the fact that at the end of the day, all of the owners can spend as much money as they want, and some of them are cheaper than others. So I can see the argument as well that it's not fair to punish the big teams who can spend the money, but the lower end teams don't feel that way, even though they can in theory spend just as much money as well. So I think there are some problems that can be fixed, there's others that can't, but it's definitely something we're going to have to continue to look at. And I think in the next few years, as the CBA is up for baseball, we could see some big changes here and things that could ultimately lead to a work stoppage, and we could have a lockout of some kind. I know that's things that people have been speculating, so it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out and just see where it goes from here.